chapter 11, 43 through 57. When he had said these things, he cried out with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." The man who had died came out, his hands and feet bound with linen strips and his face wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what he did, believed in him. Some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. So the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered the council and said, "What are we to do? For this man performs many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and take away both our place and our nation." One of them, Caiaphas, who was priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all, nor do you understand that it's better for you that one man should die for the people and not the whole nation should perish." He did not say this of his own accord, but being the high priest that year, he had prophesied that Jesus would die for the nation. Not for the nation only, but also to gather into one the children of God who were scattered abroad. So from that day on, they made plans to put him to death. Jesus, therefore, no longer walked openly amongst the Jews, but went from there to the region near the wilderness to a town called Ephraim. And there he stayed with the disciples. Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and many went up from the country to Jerusalem before the Passover to purify themselves. They were looking for Jesus and saying to one another as they stood in the temple, "What do you think, that he will not come to the feast at all?" Now the chief priests and the Pharisees had given orders that if anyone knew where he was, he should let them know, that they might arrest him. I've loved studying this chapter of John chapter 11. It has a lot of tension and buildup. It's like when you read a passage, like when you come to Luke chapter 9, verse 51, where it says Jesus set his face like flint towards Jerusalem. Okay, now just reading that passage, even though you may not know what's going to happen after that, there's a tension that is building when it comes to that passage. There's something that's going to happen. He sets his face like flint in determination towards Jerusalem. Now Jesus knows he's going to die, and we know the rest of the story, and he knows what waits for him in Jerusalem when he gets there. But there's this tension that whatever is coming, whatever is in front of Jesus, he is going to accomplish to fulfill the mission of the Father. And Jesus was determined to fulfill the mission of the Father. And with resolve and unyielding and unbreakable determination, even in the face of inevitable suffering, he is going to set his face toward Jerusalem and go there. So we say that passages a lot of times in the Bible are pregnant with meaning. And when you look at the words and the meanings and the phrases, these words in John chapter 11 are pregnant with meaning. We have seen this tension growing as we've gone through John chapter 11 from John chapter 10. We've gone over all the details of the raising of Lazarus from the dead, but just to review and kind of work up the ground again. Back in John chapter 10, verse 24, there was a crowd that was at the temple that encircled and surrounded Jesus. Now, this is not a good gathering when Jesus was in the temple. This is not a bunch of people going, "Oh, there's Jesus. Let's run to him and see what he has to say." This is a crowd that was there to encircle him. And that word literally means that they were making no way of escape. They encircled Jesus so that he could not escape. And when they encircled Jesus, they started asking him questions so that if he got the wrong answer publicly, they could close that circle and stone him to death. So just imagine that in the temple, there's Jesus, and he's explaining who he is to this crowd. They're encircling him so that there's no way of escape, and they're trying to trick him into saying something so that they could stone him under Jewish law. So they gather around Jesus, they trap him, but then, after he reasons with the people who are trying to stone him, they try to arrest him, and he escapes, goes to the other side of the Jordan with the disciples. That's 20 miles away from Jerusalem, all right? So the atmosphere and the environment of the scene of chapter 11 has been set. Because when Jesus leaves the temple, what do these people want to do to him? They want to kill him. The authorities, they want to arrest him so that it would ultimately lead to him being put to death, okay? There is a lot of tension that is building up when you come to John chapter 11 because the people in Jerusalem who surrounded him are still there. And the authorities in Jerusalem who want to see him arrested and ultimately put to death, they are still there. So when Jesus says to the apostles, when he gets to the other side of the Jordan, "Let's go back to Judea," you remember what the conversation was. Do what? Are you serious? If you go back to Judea, you're going to die, and we're going to die with you. And that's exactly what Thomas says. Thomas says to the rest of the apostles, "Let's go and die with him." John chapter 11, verse 16. So, The blood of these unbelieving Jews, especially the higher-ups in Jerusalem, which are listed at the end of John chapter 11, is boiling to a murderous boiling point with the intentions towards Jesus of killing him. There are those who believe that Jesus is the greatest threat to Jerusalem that could possibly be imagined when it comes to the hierarchy of the religion of the Jews. And they don't want him to mess everything up. And the unbelievers far outweigh the number of believers in Jerusalem. You're going to see that when you get to the end of the chapter. The unbelievers in Jerusalem far outweigh those who believe that Jesus is the Christ. And the ones who have all the power and all the influence, they want to make a crusade to eliminate this false teacher named Jesus. Now, we went over the details of the raising of Lazarus over the last 3 weeks. All right? Jesus stands in front of the tomb of Lazarus. The man's been dead for how long? 4 days, okay? Martha very practically, remember we talked about Martha's practicality? She practically spells this out when Jesus commands the stone to be rolled away, and Martha pops up and she says, Lord, by now there's an odor and it's going to stink, and he's been dead for 4 days, and why in the world are you going to move the stone away? But Jesus commands the stone to be rolled away, and he says, Lazarus, come forth. And out of the burial cave comes Lazarus, wrapped in burial garments. The people have to be told to unwrap him. Now, it was funny to me going back over this to read it again, because if you were standing there and Lazarus came forth from the cave, from the grave, from the burial cave, and Jesus tells you to go over to him, would you be a little hesitant? He's still wrapped up. Would you be a little hesitant to unwrap whatever is underneath that thing that's moving out of the, however that thing is moving out of the cave? Remember we talked about how the Bible doesn't say how Lazarus got from where he was laying to outside of the sepulcher. If you were the person that Jesus said go and unbind him, if he was looking at you, what would be your first reaction? Would you be kind of scared? I would be, but that's because I've watched too many zombie movies and horror stuff. But can you imagine Jesus looking at you and going, I want you to go unwrap him. That's okay, you can go ahead. And in my head, there are all these details, all right? The between the line things that I'll ask him when I get there. Because, okay, when Jesus was buried, what did they pack the body with? With a bunch of spices, pounds and pounds. There was like 75 pounds of spices they put around the body of Jesus. When they unwrapped Lazarus, did they fall to the ground? When Lazarus came forth, what was the first thing that he did? Did he go to the first body of water because he'd been in a burial cave for the last 4 days and take like a shower? Was he resurrected with a full belly? Was the first thing he wanted? Because he's been dead for 4 days. Is he hungry? There's a lot of questions that I have when it comes to this that are not given to us when it comes to the text. I want to focus on this, though. There is the place that this is happening. Right in front of this burial cave. We don't know where the burial cave was, all right? Like we said, Bethany was the village that was 2 miles outside of what city? Jerusalem, okay? In between Jerusalem and Bethany is a very famous mountain. The Mount of Olives. That was a cemetery hundreds of years before Jesus ever came onto the scene. Hundreds of years before the first century, it was a cemetery where they buried a lot of people. All the way back to King David. So you have this Mount of Olives that is between Bethany and Jerusalem, and then you have this cemetery that's in between them. And it might have been that Lazarus was there. We don't know where Lazarus' tomb was. But we do know where Bethany was. 2 miles from Jerusalem. And many of the Jews had come to console Mary and Martha. Now, Jesus is already a famous figure. He is already someone who is known for his wonder-working, supernatural, miracle-working abilities, all right? And when he comes to town, how long is it before everybody knows he's in town? Do people keep it a secret that Jesus is in town when he gets there? No. So when Jesus comes to Bethany, we have this little eyebrow raise. You remember what it was? Whenever Jesus is not at the home of Lazarus where Mary and Martha was, Martha goes out to meet Jesus before he ever gets into Bethany. And then she sends for her sister privately to come and see Jesus, privately, without everybody knowing about it. So Martha goes out of the city to meet Jesus. Mary goes out of the city to meet Jesus. How long do you think it's going to take before everybody knows that Jesus is there? Not very long. So there's this trickle of a crowd that comes to the tomb of Lazarus, right? This is before Jesus raises him from the dead. It's like a magnet, though, because anyone and everyone in that area who has been talking to anyone and everyone in that area would ultimately be talking about who? Jesus, and where he was going, to the tomb of Lazarus. So you have this trickle of people who are coming in because of word of mouth that Jesus is there. Jesus is going to the tomb of Lazarus. Let's all go to see Jesus. This was their social media. When somebody came home or somebody was going down the road, they would say, hey, Jesus is down there at the tomb of Lazarus. And they would go to the marketplace or go inside the village. Jesus is at the tomb of Lazarus. So there's this trickle of people who are coming in. The crowd is growing because you have the disciples who are there already. You have the family of Lazarus who's there already. You have all the people that are trying to comfort Mary that's there already. But when Lazarus is raised from the dead, and Lazarus comes out of that tomb alive, after being dead in that tomb for 4 days, that is not gasoline on a fire type of attention. That is an atomic bomb of attention. And you have to remember where Jesus is when he raises Lazarus from the dead. He is 2 miles from what city? Jerusalem. What did they try to do to him? They tried to stone him. They tried to kill him. They want to arrest him so they can ultimately kill him. All right? And Jesus has set off an atomic bomb of attention 2 miles away. You have to remember what the disciples said before they left the other side of the Jordan. We're going to die with him. That is not an exaggeration. They were reading the temperature of the room very well. Because the closer that they got to Jerusalem, the more of a threat to their lives there was going to be. And we will see how bad it is at the very end. I hope we get there. But there is a reason that John has given us this particular account of Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. There's a reason why the text is telling you and me that Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. There's a reason that John wrote down all the miracles in this gospel that he wrote down. And he sums it up at the end of the Gospel of John, in John chapter 20, verse 30 and 31, which we've gone over, ad nauseum. And that is that the purpose of John writing all of these things, the purpose of John giving you all of these accounts of eyewitness statements, and eyewitness him being there. Do you remember what it says in John 20, verse 30 and 31? All these things are written in this book. All these wonders, all these miracles are written in this book, so that you might believe that Jesus is the Son of God, the Christ, and that by believing you have life in his name. The reason why every single one of these miracles is listed is so that you might believe. Who is John writing to at the end of John chapter 20? He's writing to anyone who is reading his gospel. He's writing to you. Now, I want you to go back to what we talked about last week. What's the reason for Jesus performing the miracles that he's performing? To prove that he was who he said he was. He says, matter-of-factly, clear as day, before he raises Lazarus from the dead. Remember the prayer that he prayed? Father, I thank you that you always hear me. But then he says what? So that they might believe. This is happening so that they might believe. The exact same statement that John uses at the end of his gospel to you and to me when it comes to every single miracle that is written down in this book. So that you and I might believe and have life in his name. So, what was the reaction of Lazarus being raised from the dead, brought forth alive, unwrapped, miraculously brought to life? What's the reaction? It's a divided one. If you can believe it or not, there's a divided reaction whenever Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, who has been in the tomb for 4 days, that no one else has ever done in the entirety of the history of the world, raising a man who's been dead for 4 days. There's two different reactions. Those who had come to Mary and Martha to console them, the Jews, many of those Jews, what did they do in chapter 11, verse 45? Many of those Jews, what? They believed. The question is, what did they believe? And the question is answered in the prayer of Jesus. What did they believe when it came to chapter 11, verse 45. What did Jesus pray for in the prayer before he raised Lazarus from the dead? That they might believe something very specific, though. That you sent me. That they might believe that you sent me. And when they saw Lazarus raised from the dead, standing there, and Jesus is the one who called him forth from the grave, they believed that God sent him, that the Father sent him. But those are not the people that the disciples are worried about. You got to remember, the disciples are not Jesus. They don't know what's going on. They don't have all of the things revealed when it comes to them writing the scriptures. They don't have that perfect recollection of the Holy Spirit when it comes to putting all these details together. They are still very much human, and they have no clue what's going to happen next. They know that Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead, but what do they also know? That they're in very close proximity to Jerusalem and the people who want to kill Jesus and probably them. The apostles, the disciples, they were not nervous about people who believed in Jesus. They were nervous about getting into a crowd who did not believe that Jesus was the Christ, especially if it was a crowd that was in Jerusalem. Because who knows if the higher-ups and the authorities that are listed at the end of this chapter sent someone with extreme prejudice to get rid of Jesus or them. I want you to realize, we're going to go over this and over this, that the majority of the ruling class of the Jews in Jerusalem, the majority of those with influence and with power, those who were making the laws and those who were upholding the laws, those who were answering all the questions, the majority of those people in Jerusalem did not believe that Jesus was the Christ. And they saw Jesus as a threat to be eliminated. Now just think about that for a second. You have the majority of the people who are influential and powerful and wrapped up in every single politic you can possibly imagine in Jerusalem, those who are leading the entirety of the Jewish nation. They do not believe that Jesus is the Christ. Now, it's great to have fellow believers now when it comes to verse 45, that some of them, many of them did believe that came to console Mary and Martha. But Jesus set off an explosion of power. He set off an earthquake right outside of Jerusalem, and it wasn't a blip on the radar, okay? This was a gigantic explosion of attention, and the miracle did what it was supposed to do. Many of the Jews who had come to see Jesus believed in what they saw Jesus do, and they believed in what Jesus said about himself. But, and this is the tension-causing word, this is the contrast that blows up the entirety of the happiness of the scene, that people believe that Jesus is who he said he was. But some of them went back to who? The Pharisees, and told them what Jesus had done. This is not a person who has seen the miracle and is so infatuated with Jesus that they go and tell everyone that they know. This is not someone who believes that Jesus is who he says he was, and they go to the Pharisees and say, I want you to know that we have found the Christ. This is someone who does not believe in Jesus above what the word of the Pharisees is. Who does not believe in the explanation of Jesus above what the explanation of the Pharisees is. You know what the big thing is? This is a person who saw Lazarus come from the grave. They were an eyewitness to what Jesus did to raise a 4-day dead man from the grave. And the first thing that they do is go to the Pharisees. They watched Jesus literally call a man forth from the grave who had been dead for 4 days. They did not deny the fact that Jesus performed the miracle. They could not deny the fact that Jesus performed the miracle. And still, they thought the Pharisees knew more than Jesus did. Because what's the first thing that they do? Now you might say, well, that's ridiculous. The exact same thing happened in John chapter 9. Jesus healed the man who was born blind. No one could deny that. Yet what did the neighborhood do when it came to not being able to answer the question? Did they go to Jesus or did they go to the Pharisees? This is the culture of Jerusalem. This is the influence of Jerusalem. This is what Jesus has to deal with all the time. That no matter if he raised someone from the dead who had been in the tomb for 4 days, people are still rooted in the belief that the Pharisees know more than anybody else, that the council knows more than anybody else. And they don't look to Jesus, who is giving them all of the evidence that they need to understand that God is the one who is speaking through him, not that God is speaking through the Pharisees. So these people went to the Pharisees. Once again, they couldn't deny the amazing miracle. But chapter 11, verse 47 gives you the details of all these powerful people. All right? This is the ruling class of the Jews. This is why the apostles, the disciples, were so afraid to go back into Judea. This is a laundry list of the most influential people and ruling bodies in the entire religion of the Jews. And you have to remember, this is worldwide. These were the leaders of the Jewish religion worldwide. You remember all the nations that are listed when you come to Pentecost in Acts chapter 2? All of those nations where people went back to, that's where all the Jews were from, who came to Pentecost. You remember all the synagogues that Paul went into to preach the gospel? They were everywhere. These guys who were in Jerusalem were the leaders of the Jews over the entire world. Now you tell me they didn't have power and influence. So, imagine you're a Jew living in the first century. You've grown up in Jerusalem, around Jerusalem, going to Jerusalem for all these feasts. You've studied under various teachers and rabbis and all kinds of scribes and Pharisees, and you have been at the temple with them. You've heard them speak over your lifetime. You may have even gotten to meet some of these powerful men and some of these powerful people when they go to the temple and show themselves to the crowd and the public. You may have heard them speak at various feasts that happen and get-togethers at the temple, and you know how the power of these people work. Do you think that if you were a Jew in the first century, you would think twice before you went against the high priest? You think you would think twice about going against the Sanhedrin council if you were living in Jerusalem, or you were one of the people who traveled to Jerusalem? You think you'd think twice about going against the authorities when you see what they did to somebody else that went against them? You think that you know how the power works when it comes to Jerusalem? And this has been your entire life, following the orders and the guidance of these men when it came to Jerusalem. And these were the guys that were to be consulted about everything. This was their culture, because this didn't just happen when it came to Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead. This happened in John chapter 9 when Jesus healed a man who was born blind. The reaction of those who heard and saw these things tells you how deep their trust in the Pharisees and the Sanhedrin council was. To see someone raised from the dead and still say, well, I need to go and talk to the Pharisees. So you have all of these influential people and all these ruling classes of people, this entire Sanhedrin council that ruled over and governed the entire body of the Israelites. They have come to the conclusion, almost all of them, I'm not going to say Nicodemus, we'll not leave him out. Most of the people on that council have already said that if you confess that Jesus is the Christ, you will be cast out. You're not going to partake in Passover. You're not going to partake in Pentecost. You're not going to partake in any of those things. If you believe that Jesus is the Christ, you're out. So if you follow Jesus, you're in danger of being seen as turning against your own. Now, I'm not trying to give excuse for what these people did when it came to seeing what Jesus did and running to the Pharisees. I'm just looking at the context. Because right after this, you were given a list of the most influential people in the entirety of Jerusalem that reigned over the Jewish religion worldwide. So I want to kind of boil this down into 21st century American language. I know there's a lot of variables when it comes to this, okay, that don't match up. But I want you to see it like this. Let's say you've been an American your entire life. That you have, shed blood and tears and poured into this nation. Maybe not you, but you have stories from your grandparents and great-grandparents, and you know all the laws of the land since you were young. You've memorized the various states, and you were raised with the Constitution and all that stuff, right? And you have met congressmen or senators or presidents, and you know the nation's history and laws, and you are a tried and true and a proud American dedicated to your country. And Jesus comes along and challenges every detail of what you say you trust in the most. And he even raises the dead to show you that you should put more trust in him than you put anything else. How hard would it be? Now, I know that there are a lot of variables that are different when it comes to you looking at America and looking at Israel. I understand. But the principles are the same. If Jesus stood in front of you and showed you beyond a shadow of a doubt that he and the Father are one, and yet the nation that is around you is telling you and influencing you that and saying Jesus is not who he says he is. And if you know where he is, you tell us so that we can go arrest him. I want you to realize in this text that the most powerful leaders in the world to the Jews, these are our presidents, our congressmen, these are our Supreme Court justices, these are our law enforcement. If you want to put it in our language, these are our lawyers, these are our teachers, these are the CEOs of the companies that run the world. And in John 11, verse 47, it says, the chief priests, the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin council, and how he describes how the leadership of the Jews was in connection with the power of the Romans and represented the Jews to the most powerful nation and empire on the planet. The text mentions Caiaphas, the high priest. He's like the guy at the head of every single discussion table. To put it in our terms, this is the president, the vice president, the Secret Service, senators, congressmen, Supreme Court, FBI, CIA, and every single alphabet you could possibly imagine when it comes to anything in our society. And they're almost all telling the people of Israel that Jesus is a threat, and that if you follow him, you are no longer a part of this nation. That Jesus is a heretic that needs to be eliminated and that needs to be arrested and dealt with. Now, we rejoice when it comes to reading the first part of this, that there were many of those Jews that came and they believed that Jesus was who he said he was. But now you understand the context of why there is such a divide between the many, and then there were those who went away and went to the Pharisees. You know why.
There was feathers in their hat.
Do what?
There were feathers in their hat.
Yankee Doodle. You've just seen Jesus raised from the dead. Unmistakably supernatural. But some of them, they knew the danger they were in because of where they were. They knew the city that they were very close to. And I don't know. I wanted to write something about this and research more about this. But there's a lot of this that goes along with the story of Judas that I did not know when it came to context. Because you know who was amongst all of those who went across the Jordan and came back to Bethany? Judas. He's in that situation right now. He sees the danger of that situation right now. And we know that he is a greedy person. So if you have the opportunity as Judas to see a way out towards these influential people who are telling you that if you don't do this, then you'll have nothing, you see how that kind of snowballs into the avalanche that we know is Judas' story? I want you to think that if the entire governing body of the United States told you that if you follow Jesus, you'll be kicked out of the country, and they threaten the very livelihood that you have come to establish if you follow Jesus, which category would you find yourself looking at in John chapter 11, verse 45 and 46? Would you be part of the many of those who believed, who came to the tomb, or would you be someone who saw an escape to go to the Pharisees?
I can't help think of too, in this situation, Paul was there.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, Paul was part of that.
Well, I would say that he was a whole lot younger than we probably think he was at that time.
But
He's still around somewhere.
he was under the Gamaliel or
Yeah, and more than likely, he was of Tarsus in Cilicia. So yes, he would have to have come back to Jerusalem at some time to study under the rabbis and things like that. But if he was so young at that time, he might have still been in Cilicia, but we don't know as far as the age. But that's a really good point, because if he was old enough and he was under the feet of Gamaliel, like Acts chapter 5 says, at this time, he would have been right in the thick of it. But here's the last thing, okay? If you think the disciples' description of what was going to happen when they got to Bethany was exaggerated, that they thought that someone was going to kill it, and if you think that us thinking that the entire U.S. government would be coming after us in exactly the same way, after Lazarus is raised from the dead, so many came to Lazarus, and so many came to believe in who Jesus was, that the chief priests plotted to assassinate Lazarus. This is not Jesus we're talking about. That the chief priest in Jerusalem is now plotting and scheming to assassinate Lazarus. Not Jesus. They already have their eyes on Jesus. This is Lazarus. So this is the atmosphere into which we see Jesus when it comes to raising Lazarus from the dead. So, sorry I got a little lost. We'll probably break down all of the people and the positions that are mentioned in John chapter 11 next week, because there's a lot of stuff that kind of opens your eyes.